What ancient force mourns beside us in the silence before death? Why do countless generations, across cultures and centuries, describe the same spectral woman crying out in the dark? Is the Banshee a ghost, a goddess, or the echo of our deepest fear? In this immersive exploration, we unravel the layers of folklore, psychology, and ancestral memory surrounding Ireland's most haunting legend. From sacred mounds to modern farmsteads, from whispered tales to scientific theories, the Banshee lingers, not merely as a myth, but as a mirror held up to our dread of the unknown. Shrouded in mist and memory, the Irish countryside seems to hum with secrets, where every gust of wind might carry a lament older than the land itself. It is here, among the mossy stones and shadowed hedgerows, that the legend of the Banshee persists, not as a mere folk tale, but as a living whisper passed from lips to ears across centuries. Her name, Bean Sis, meaning woman of the fairy mound, evokes more than just a ghostly presence. It gestures toward a time when the spiritual and material worlds coexisted without contradiction. Unlike transient apparitions, the Banshee endures as a spectral witness to human mortality. Dwelling on the cusp between ancient divinity and modern dread, she is neither fully spirit nor myth, but something more elusive. A symbol woven into the national psyche, where grief, fear, and reverence intertwine. Even in today's digital age, her cry finds resonance, not through belief alone, but through the emotional truths she embodies: loss, inevitability, and the thin veil that separates life from what lies beyond. The origins of the Banshee reach into the dim recesses of pre-Christian Ireland, an era where spiritual belief was not segregated from daily life, but interwoven into every action, every season, every death. In this deeply animistic world, the wailing woman was not an anomaly, but a known presence, a messenger of mortality whose cries cut through the silence of night like prophecy. Ancient Irish texts and oral traditions describe her as bound to the noble Gaelic bloodlines, including the O'Neills, O'Connors, and McCarthys, not merely as a family spirit, but as a supernatural herald whose appearance meant death was close. Her keening, the high, mournful wail said to shatter even the strongest resolve, was more than sound. It was a psychological tremor. Modern neuroscientific studies into fear suggest that high-pitched, disembodied cries trigger primitive areas of the brain associated with survival. The Banshee's cry, then, can be understood as an archetypal alarm bell, bypassing logic and striking directly into the amygdala. In this way, folklore intersects with biology, a mythic figure wielding a timeless, primal power. In the shifting silhouettes of Irish folklore, the Banshee takes many forms, each one tied to the ancient archetype of the divine feminine. She might emerge as a radiant young woman, sorrowful and spectral, or as a shriveled crone, weathered by centuries of mourning. This fluidity echoes the triple goddess of Celtic tradition, the maiden, the mother, and the crone, a sacred cycle of birth, transformation, and death. The Banshee is most aligned with the crone, but she bears traits of all three, making her both an omen and embodiment of fate. Her appearance is often shrouded in ethereal robes, grey or white, like fog and moonlight, with hair cascading in waves, tangled and windblown. And always there is the silver comb, a deceptively delicate object that in folklore becomes a trap. Legends say to pick it up is to invite doom, for it is the Banshee's lure, a charm that binds the curious to the other world. In global mythologies, this motif is mirrored in tales, from Japan's Waire to the La Llorona of Latin America. Sorrowful women whose long hair and haunting presence signal spiritual unrest. The Banshee, then, belongs not only to Ireland, but to a larger sisterhood of supernatural mourners, each tied to the mysteries of death, femininity, and the soul's departure. Through centuries of oral tradition and the inked pages of history, the Banshee has retained her role as death's quiet herald, her cries echoing along bloodlines as much as across the windswept hills, particularly among ancient Gaelic families such as the O'Neills, O'Connors, and McCarthys. Belief in a familial Banshee was not just accepted, it was expected. She was a private mourner, granted only to those of storied lineage, her voice rising in lament before tragedy knocked. In the 18th and 19th centuries, these accounts moved from fireside stories to printed folklore collections and journals. Eyewitnesses, villagers, farmers, even priests, documented cases of keening that preceded news of distant deaths, sometimes occurring simultaneously in different locations, as though the spirit herself travelled across miles in an instant. The psychological weight of this consistency cannot be overstated. Shared cultural scripts reinforce belief, and in communities bound by ancestry and land, the Banshee became more than myth. She was memory made manifest, a spectral thread woven through identity and grief, passed on from generation to generation like an heirloom. Yet, the Banshee does not dwell solely in the yellowed pages of folklore. Even in the era of smartphones and science, a cry persists, unclaimed and unexplained. Rural Ireland, in particular, remains fertile ground for such phenomena, places where the boundary between superstition and belief is thin as fog. In 2018, a farmer in County Clare relayed his account to a local radio station. A blood-curdling scream ripped through the night, startling his livestock into frenzy and freezing him in place. Come morning, his elderly neighbour was found dead in her bed. The man, known for his pragmatism and scepticism, described the event without flourish, only solemn conviction. His testimony is not unique. Similar experiences, often undocumented and exchanged in whispers. Common in isolated villages, these modern encounters retain all the hallmarks of the old tales: restless animals, icy chills, a cry with no origin. Psychologists might view this as shared grief anticipation or a culturally coded hallucination. But for those who live through it, such rationalizations fall flat. In these instances, the Banshee becomes more than a relic. She is a lived reality, reactivated by the primal circuitry of fear, mystery, and reverence in a landscape that still remembers her name. Not all Banshee encounters are born of sound alone. Some witnesses claim to have seen her, not fleetingly, but in detail, as though she had momentarily stepped through the veil separating worlds. One such account comes from Donegal, where a man reported seeing a pale woman in white gliding along the edges of his land, her feet never touching earth. She vanished the moment he tried to speak, and by morning his father had died of a heart attack. Stories like this are dismissed by skeptics as grief-induced hallucinations. Yet their consistency, the figure, the timing, the death that follows demands closer inspection. Visual sightings of the Banshee often mirror sleep paralysis apparitions, spectral, silent, terrifying. Yet these visions occur not in the stillness of sleep, but in waking moments of clarity. This dissonance fuels the folklore further, as science struggles to pin the phenomenon down. Around the world, parallel entities echo this experience. In the Philippines, the White Lady in Scandinavian lore, the Myling in India, the Chural, all female spirits of mourning and vengeance tied to untimely death. These spirits, like the Banshee, are both feared and respected, part warning, part lament. Whether hallucination, hysteria, or harbinger, her presence insists on being felt. For those who see her, the encounter is never forgotten. Some of the most compelling endorsements of the Banshee's reality come from historical figures not typically given to fantasy. Sir Walter Scott, a titan of romantic literature and a keen folklorist, noted the recurrence and consistency of Banshee reports across Irish regions. His writings, while cautious, acknowledged that such legends were often rooted in collective memory rather than fabrication. Similarly, Lady Jane Wilde, known under her pen name Speranza, and mother to Oscar Wilde, offered vivid accounts of the Banshee's wail in her collections of Irish folklore. One such report described how entire communities heard the lament before the death of a beloved parish priest, lending weight to the idea that the Banshee was not a private spectre, but a communal omen. Wilde's documentation was meticulous, weaving folk stories with national identity during a time when Irish culture was under colonial pressure. In both writers' hands, the Banshee became more than a ghost. She was a political and cultural totem, a keeper of Irish sorrow and sovereignty. These historical accounts offer not only belief, but a bridge between the mythic and the real, penned by voices too disciplined to dismiss the phenomenon outright. The coming of Christianity to Ireland marked a theological collision with the old faiths, and the Banshee stood squarely at the centre of that divide. Pagan spirits were reclassified through a biblical lens, and where once she was a fairy mourner, the Banshee was now viewed by some as a demonic entity or fallen angel. Clerics labelled her a trickster spirit, sent to mislead the faithful and sow dread. Yet the rural faithful, rooted in their ancestral traditions, resisted these interpretations. For many, she was not malevolent, but sacred, an emissary of sorrow, whose cry was met not with fear, but with prayer. Indeed, in some Catholic households, the sound of the Banshee prompted immediate recitation of the Rosary, not to drive her away, but to comfort the soul she mourned. This duality, sinner and saint, warning and witness, reflects the broader synthesis of pagan and Christian belief, unique to Irish spirituality. The Banshee became a liminal figure in theology, as well as folklore, not exorcised but absorbed. Her existence was never officially endorsed by the Church, yet she endured, finding space in a belief system that paradoxically condemned and sanctified her. In this uneasy harmony, the Banshee reveals herself again, a threshold spirit occupying not one world but two. Science, too, has stepped into the shadow of the Banshee, seeking to explain her through the lens of the human mind. Psychological theories suggest that the wail may be a form of anticipatory grief, a subconscious recognition of imminent loss that manifests as sound or vision. In rural communities, where death often arrives quietly and spreads swiftly, shared emotional cues can trigger collective experiences. Neuroscientific research has shown that grief hallucinations, especially auditory ones, are common among the bereaved, particularly the elderly. The Banshee, in this context, becomes an externalization of inner sorrow. But this model faces challenges when applied to simultaneous sightings or events involving multiple people, sometimes across distances. These reports confound standard psychological interpretation and raise questions about the limits of perception. Sleep paralysis is another avenue of inquiry, a phenomenon where the mind is aware, but the body cannot move, often accompanied by visions or sounds. Yet, most Banshee encounters occur while awake, alert, and mobile. The dissonance between scientific explanation and folkloric consistency creates a liminal space of inquiry, a place where belief and biology collide. In trying to decode her, the Banshee continues to elude definition, remaining as enigmatic in the lab as she is in the legend. The Banshee rarely harms in a physical sense. She does not chase, possess, or wound. Yet her danger is profound. She embodies the terror of inevitability. Sudden realization that death is near and unstoppable. A wail is less a scream than an intrusion, tearing open the ordinary with something ancient and irreversible. In psychological terms, she represents what Carl Jung might call a shadow archetype, the personification of truths we deny but must one day face. When people speak of being driven to madness by her cry, it reflects a deeper rupture, a psychic encounter with mortality, stripped of comfort or denial. In some versions of the legend, those who touch or pursue her suffer misfortune, but often the harm is more existential than literal. To witness the Banshee is to be reminded that some knowledge, like the exact moment of a loved one's death, is too heavy to bear. She is fear incarnate, not in form, but in effect. A liminal being whose power lies in awakening what lies dormant in all of us. The unspoken dread of finality. To trace the Banshee's lineage is to walk backward into myth, to a time when gods ruled the hills and every natural sound was a voice. She is thought to descend from the Tuatha Dé Dan, the supernatural race said to have inhabited Ireland before the arrival of mortals. Once deities, they were driven underground and diminished in stature, but not in influence. They became the Aos Eol, the people of the mounds, immortal and hidden, yet always watching. The Banshee, in this cosmology, is not simply a ghost, but a remnant of divine mourning, a figure of sorrow that bridges the celestial and the earthly. Unlike the wrathful fairies of later tales, she is not malicious, but mournful, carrying the dignity of her origins, even in despair. In this way, she preserves the ancient role of the keening woman, the Coenade whose public lament marked death with reverence and release. The Banshee is a mythic evolution of this role, woven from the same cultural fabric, now transformed into a supernatural echo of ancient mourning rituals. Her cries are not for the dead alone, they are for the memory of a people who once lived closer to the gods. Today, the Banshee dwells not only in tales, but in the land itself, in the hedgerows twisted by wind, the stone fences crumbling with age, and the hush that falls just before dusk. She exists in a space between legend and memory, where folklore refuses to fade and belief never fully disappears. Her cry echoes through Irish literature, songs, and cinema, evolving yet unchanged, haunting yet strangely familiar. In the modern psyche, she remains a powerful metaphor for death, for loss, for the fear we try to rationalize but cannot escape. Whether understood as a supernatural sentinel, a psychological manifestation, or a symbolic archetype, the Banshee's endurance is undeniable. She survives because we still fear the unknown, and because in every quiet night, we still listen for what might be calling. For some, she is real. For others, she is myth. But for all, she is a story not yet finished, a wailing thread in the fabric of the Irish soul, reminding us that death is not only an end, but a passage watched by ancient eyes.